Welcome today. Thank you for joining us on Get Vertical. Our guest is John Buckner. He is the founder of Insightful Selling, powered by Sales Acceleration. Did I get that right?
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. And John, man, you've got this incredible background that I've known you for over 20 years now. It's crazy to think about that we've been friends for that long. And I'm thinking about the different companies you've been to, just the way your career's grown. You went from a really weird background in the sense of we were in psychology at one point, right?
That's right, Mike. You have a good memory.
And then from that, you transitioned into sales. And how did you first make that transition? And then from that, you went from you had 3 or 4 stints with major blue chip brands along the way that a lot of people would just love to hear some of your stories.
Well, Mike, thank you for having me first. It's great to be here. And I love what you're doing, and I can't believe you and I are back together again. It's been 20 years, and I'm thinking back to one of the blue chip companies you mentioned. You and I worked at Ingersoll Rand in New Jersey together, and at that time, I wore a couple different hats there. You recall very well. I was a national account manager, and then I became a channel marketing manager for one of our segments. And you and I went on a sales call together in Long Island.
Yes.
If you won't forget that. And we strategized together, we made the pitch together and we're bonded. And then after that, we wound up at Newell Rubbermaid together down in North Carolina.
Yes.
And I was in really more of a marketing capacity. I did a couple of things there, channel marketing and product marketing. And so I can't believe we're back together again. And you're right, I have a lot of diversity. So not only have I done tools with you and equipment, Mike, but I've done, believe it or not, coffee and tea, major stint there, and I'll share a few stories about coffee and tea today, building materials, pressure-sensitive adhesive tape. So I'm all over the place. Lots of experience, lots of variety, I guess, Mike.
And then different channels, different end markets, different customers, right? Different selling motions along the way. So speaking of selling motions, one of the things that comes up a lot is why sales, right? And then also, what is sales, right? Sometimes it can be overgeneralized.
Well, I'm glad you asked that because I want your listeners to get grounded in what sales is and what it's not. But it is one of our oldest professions, and it's going to continue no matter what happens with AI, no matter what happens with brands and retail, but I'll address that. Let's just think of it as whenever a product or service changes hands, you've got a creator and you've got a consumer. And sales is what makes our economy run. It's absolutely critical to capitalism. Sales creates wealth. Sales enhances life. Why? Because these goods and services, they're needed for particular reasons that the consumer or the buyer knows, and we need sales people there to assist them in making their choices and the journey that it takes for them to figure out what it is that they really need and what they really want.
Right. Okay. So going off of that, there were a couple of pieces that was great, by the way. You said it's essential for creating wealth, and it's essential for products to change hands. And so let's think about it from 2 perspectives, because a lot of times the people that are listening on this they really are about how do we grow our business, how do I grow my career, things like that. So if we think about it from a growth perspective, and wealth creation is part of that, when you think about sales for that, you're right. AI is coming in. It's extremely disruptive. Not just AI, but also the whole e-commerce aspect of things. The digitalization of selling is changing the way the selling motion takes place and the way relationships take place. So let's unpack that a little bit, if you don't mind, and go back to when you think about sales creating opportunities and helping the consumer make a better decision. A lot of times people think, at least I do, I'm like, no, I don't necessarily want a salesperson helping me because they're not going to do what's in my best interest. They're going to do what's in their best interest. So how do you deal with that?
Well, I love that question, Mike, because, sellers have gotten a bad reputation. The fact is that we've stereotyped them. We thought, yeah, these are these car salesmen. They're high pressure. They're manipulative. I don't want to be around somebody trying to tell me what I need to buy. That's turned out to be substantially a myth. Salespeople are a lot different than that. In point of fact, who salespeople are today, and I'm going to give you just a kind of the character of the salesperson. They are very curious. They ask amazing questions. They can diagnose needs and wants and actually surface even unmet needs and wants that a consumer might have. Salespeople have high integrity. They tell the truth. Salespeople have no interest actually in manipulating you. What they are really interested in is helping you match what your desire is with the perfect product that's optimized, for your needs. So it's really changed a lot. And I admire salespeople because they are extremely organized. They're tenacious and very hardworking. They have this presence and prescience, and I'll say that they seem to show up at the right time, just when you need them. And that's what we're counting on with salespeople. Now, I want to go back and address something that you talked about before, because you added in a couple of other dimensions of this thing. Listen, Mike, as the product gets more complex and higher cost, you began to see the human dimension where an actual salesperson shows up on the scene. As the product, and this is a general rule, but there are exceptions, as the product is smaller, the purchase decision can be made swiftly, then the brand becomes the salesperson. Literally, the brand communicates a message, it sits on a shelf, maybe eye level, and you begin to say, okay, I see all the different options, this is the competition, but I can pick out the thing I need in a retail store or on a computer screen for an e-commerce enabled retail purchase. So let's just set aside for a second, or let's segregate for a second. There are brand sales that are, relatively speaking, lower cost, lower complexity, don't necessarily need a human involved in that transaction. And then they're higher cost, complex sales, a lot of choices. And oh, by the way, I need someone to consult with me about my problem so they can help specify a solution. That's where it separates. That's not to say that even very expensive purchases, homes, vehicles, you still want to back that up with information,
right,
online that people can have, because today they're doing research such that they are 60% of the way down the road towards a decision before you as a salesperson even show up on the scene. But that's enhancing their knowledge and doing their comparison work. So if you get to the stage of a discussion with a customer who's 60% down the way, then they've narrowed who they're going to buy from to just a few select providers. So you've done pretty well at that point. Already you're probably thinking, now I see where marketing comes in. It really is a partnership between marketing and sales.
Oh, yeah. I completely agree with you on that. And, as you walk down through the funnel, there's a handoff that takes place between those functions and that engagement from that standpoint. I love what you said in terms of, the simpler the transaction, or the simpler the product or the offering, right? The more dependent you are on the brand and the more complex it is. I'm also wondering about, what about the consequence of the purchase? So even if it's a simple purchase, I'm thinking about going back to, the B2B selling classes that I would go to. And one of the examples I would classically use would be like a hose that's going to be used, a hydraulic hose that's going to be used in a plant, or is going to be, put into a piece of capital equipment, again and again and again. And that hydraulic hose in and of itself is not that expensive or that complicated. But the consequence of selecting the right one, going with the lowest bidder, is not always the best price, not always the best bet. So does consequence come into play with that as well? Or
I like the way you're thinking, Mike. It's a great question. Here's how to divide that up in your mind. There's the cost of acquisition, so that's the purchase price. And then a term that I know you remember very well because they used it at a couple of the big industrial MRO distributors that we used to sell to. There's cost of ownership. So when you own that product over time, is it saving you time or costing you time as you use the product? Is it making you more productive or less productive? How is that product performing? So Clay Christensen, the late Clay Christensen of Harvard Business School, he came up with a theory called jobs to be done. And he said the first purchase is the big hire. Let's just put a capital H there. And then every time you use that product is another little hire. So as a salesperson as a let's say manufacturer, we want to win the first hire, but we want to win all the little hires. And here's the reason why, Mike. It's our reputation. It's the opportunity for expansion. The lifetime value of that customer is a lot greater than one transaction. We want them to expand with us into other product lines, adjacencies, other categories. We want them to buy aftermarket parts from us. And so you can see why the cost of ownership piece is just as important a dialogue as what the cost of acquisition is. And you're right, Mike. There's a phrase, you cut your nose to spite your face if you decide to go cheap, because there's a fallacy there. Sure, you obtain the item for cheap, but you've also probably purchased a product that's not going to last very long. The obsolescence is going to be maybe half the length of the higher quality product. Do you want to put yourself through that?
Right.
Now you're probably buying 3 of those in the space of a higher quality product would have been 1 of those. So that's some of the analytics now that really smart purchasing managers, you can appeal to them on that basis because they don't want to have to be buying that product every 5 years. They would rather let one product last for 15.
Right. No, that makes so much sense. I love the way you're going with that. So let's go back real quick in time. How did you end up and choose to go into sales? What were you doing before, and then how did you make the pivot?
Well, my first goal was I wanted to make it to VP of marketing. So I wore all the marketing hats, as you remember, channel, product marketing, marketing manager, director. And finally, I was able to achieve vice president of marketing in coffee and tea. And I'll tell you something about me, Mike. I was always pro sales. And I want to right away disabuse all the listeners of this notion that, marketing is smart, sales are dumb, or marketing's arrogant, sales are fast talkers. All these different stereotypes, they just get in the way. Here's the thing. We have different roles, the same objective. The objective is growth. And increasingly, we need the parts to be interchangeable. We need to cross-functionally develop our people, both in marketing and sales roles. And at S&D Coffee, which later became WestRock, they asked me, based on the fact that I went on every major sales call to every major restaurant chain, and I was the guy that was in charge of presenting the data. And we were selling with market research, but it wasn't just the data, it was the insight and the application. So what do we do with it? Well, our vice presidents of sales, when we were calling on major chains, it could be an Arby's call, it could be a McDonald's call, it could be a Wendy's call, it could be a Chick-fil-A call. And I want to tell you the Chick-fil-A story. Often winning or losing the business had not a lot to do with the coffee and had a lot to do with the insight related to how does this product fit on the menu, who is going to buy it, what are their demographics, and how can I lead the restaurant chain toward a revenue-producing, craveable item that everybody's going to love. That's really the ultimate journey. So I was asked by the company to step up and lead all of national accounts as the senior vice president of sales. And so now I moved from a marketing role back into a sales role, but this was what we'll call enterprise sales, Mike. This is, major. It was a $200 million division.
right? So wow. Okay, so you made the jump from marketing into sales, and it's funny because for the life of me, to your point, when we first met, you were in a sales role, and that's kind of the way I always had it pictured. But you're right, you spent a tremendous amount of your career straight in the marketing lane as well. So when you made that transition from marketing into sales, what were two or three things that stood out to your mind where you were thinking, "Ooh, I've got to get better at X to be successful in this role"?
Well, thanks for that, Mike, because it's helping me remember what my career journey was like.
Right.
I had to learn how to coach. Salespeople are performers. Make no mistake. Sales is a performance sport. And what do I mean by that?
Yeah.
Nobody's measured more than salespeople. They get their scorecard every single day. There's opposition. There's a chance that you could lose, but that's the thing that seems to spark salespeople. They're more motivated. They tend to be incredibly self-directed. And just to kind of take the analogy a little bit further, every performer needs a coach. We know this from, we've just finished up the national championship for college football, and we're going to the Super Bowl here in a couple of weeks. And every player has an abundance of coach. You got your position coach, you got your head coach, you've got your strength and conditioning coach, you've got your nutritionist, you might even have a sports psychologist, right? These guys are inundated with coaches. So we know that championship performances to some degree hinge on a coachable player taking coaching. And I'm going to tell you why that's so important. And a big part of my journey had to be to learn to be a performance coach. But there are three things that coaches do for salespeople. And the first one is they help you overcome blind spots, things that you can't see. The second one is that they see, like a drone flying over a field, they see the entire field of play, and they have seen it all before, and you haven't, and so you want to benefit from all of their experiences. And the third thing is they transfer their belief and conviction about you from them to you. And if they believe with this sort of amazing conviction, then you'll believe that you can go do it. Mm-hmm. And so I learned that those components were going to be super critical as we were going to perform well and win more business because, as you know, Mike, just like in sports, it comes down to a few plays.
Yeah.
Sometimes a few unforced errors, sometimes and mistakes, but also a few incredibly heroic efforts that make the difference between victory and defeat. And that's exactly what we were trying to do.
That's fantastic. I love the way you made that very real. And when I think about that, and you mentioned Chick-fil-A earlier, there's an incredible story there. Do you mind just give me a little bit of information on that?
Well, Mike, as you know, and your listeners know, people do business with people they know, trust, and like. And there was a fellow, you remember Paul Trotty, because he worked in Power Tool Accessories with us when we were at Irwin, which is Stanley Black & Decker now. And just like me, so I went from tools to food and beverage. How do you do that, Well, Paul wound up at Chick-fil-A from Newell Rubbermaid. I can't explain it, but he shows up on the scene. Dan Cathy, the son of Truett, the founder, said that coffee was the most broken item on the menu at Chick-fil-A, and Chick-fil-A wanted to go after breakfast. The restaurant business is a day part business. You play in 1, 2, or all 3 day parts. The missing day part for Chick-fil-A was breakfast because, you probably remember this, who was thinking about eating chicken at breakfast? Not a lot of people were thinking about it. Well, Chick-fil-A was thinking about it. How could they transform the market? Well, not without a great coffee. Why? People drink coffee in the morning to get awake, to have the energy to make it on their commute. And also, it's a wonderful beverage that complements all our breakfast food. So Dan was right. He said, we've got to have an incredible coffee. Paul had to have somebody he trusted. And he knew me from our tool days. The next thing that happened is, I'm going to go back what I said about Mike. An insight is data applied to a solution. And I looked at the RFP. It's a request for proposal. 24 roasters were submitting for this opportunity.
Ooh.
So Chick-fil-A was definitely looking at, one of the things buyers do is they look at a lot of options
Right.
before they make their decision. The RFP called for, we're going to rejuvenate coffee. Please submit your best coffee blends. Of course, that implied hot coffee right in the morning.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? I decided that we need to look at the data. And here's what was happening, Mike, at the time. You had Gen Y and Gen Z, and they preferenced iced coffee over hot coffee. And I thought, well, sure, maybe for a treat or maybe, a snack beverage. Absolutely not. They preferred it with food at breakfast time versus hot coffee.
No way.
So the light went on. We got the insight. When we went in for our presentation, which in the food and beverage world means that you're going to prepare drinks and everybody's going to sample them, they were expecting we were going to brew our drip coffee and everybody's going to sit around and drink hot coffee. We're making up iced coffee from cold brew concentrate and showing them a build in 90 seconds or less. We were the only roaster that presented a fast food,
right,
iced coffee solution that was operationally stable. And so Chick-fil-A, asking for one great drink, they got two. It was a 2-for-1. And I'll tell you something, later on the franchisees took that cold brew coffee concentrate, and they mashed it up with the Ice Dream ice cream, and it became frosted coffee, a third item on the menu.
That's where frosted coffee
came from.
I love their frosted coffee.
Exactly. The cold brew concentrate.
I don't like cold brew, right? I don't like iced coffee. No, but I love hot coffee and I love their frosted coffee.
There you go.
So that's wild. So did the franchisees actually create that product or what happened?
I've got to give Chick-fil-A credit. They listen. And the franchisees are experimenting in the restaurant, and they came back to corporate with an idea about, well, look, this cold brew concentrate that we do for iced coffee is amazing. All you have to do is we're going to mix it in the milkshake machine, and it comes together as an amazingly decadent, craveable drink. And those are the beginnings of frosted coffee.
That's wild. I love that. I had no idea. This is the first time I've heard that. That's
I'll
crazy.
tell you something. It's the gift that keeps giving, Mike. At that time, they had 1,800 stores. They're well over 3,400 stores now. And I'll tell you another interesting statistic. So the big measure in restaurant business is AUV, average unit volume.
Right.
You'll love this. So in only 6 days a week, Chick-fil-A does what McDonald's does in 7 days a week, not by a little bit, by a long shot.
Really?
Their average AUV is somewhere north of $5 million a year.
Okay.
And the average McDonald's is more in the range of between $2 and $3 million a year. So you can see that double the volume in 1/7 of the time open. That's an amazing statistic. And it shows you the brilliance of Chick-fil-A and the throughput with the double drive-thrus. And you've seen it all because here where you live in Dallas-Fort Worth, they're everywhere.
They are. Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. So that's wild. All right. Now, back me up real quick, because one of the things that I remember a lot is what you just described, though, was high-stakes selling, right? Even though you knew Paul, that got you an invitation. That didn't get you anything more than an invitation. And there were 23 other invitations that were extended. So along those lines, that's high stakes selling. You've got a lot on the line. You got a lot of pressure. S&D at the time is counting on you from an enterprise sales standpoint to move the needle for them dramatically. Did you lose sleep any of those nights? Was that stressful, or how did you approach? So these are two different questions. One is walk me through the stress load that went with that. But then also, how did you guys approach it to de-stress it and to put yourself in a winning position?
Well, thinking back, Mike, I can tell you that there were some milestones in there, and there were certainly anxieties. Chick-fil-A was the one that had always eluded us and the one that we always wanted. The process took over 12 months.
Okay.
From the first connection with Chick-fil-A, when we found out that they recognized the problem on their side, to the point where we were awarded the business. There were definitely some anxious moments in there. However, we had a lot of confidence based on the fact that we were the leading supplier to quick serve restaurants in America. Lots of experience at McDonald's and Dunkin' and Wendy's and Burger King, and the list kind of goes on, including Whataburger, which is based right here in Texas. So we also had to lean on our team, and I think that that's an important thing for your listeners to remember, is that nobody goes about this alone. I had an amazing team. Toby was our vice president of national accounts, and we had such a great friendship. And I think Toby deserves a lot of credit for just being genuine and authentic. And during the course of time, he and I would get together and talk about what's the next right move. I wrote the proposal. I still remember it was a 21-page proposal at night when we were in Chicago at the National Restaurant Show back in the hotel room. And I did it over the course of a couple, 3-4 days. And I knew when I put the finishing touches on it, it was a beverage strategy with the right mix of insights. So you do the best you can, but I knew that we were coming at it, Mike, from a solutions perspective, not an item at a price perspective. And that gave us a lot of solace that we knew that we were on the right track. We could appeal to the business strategists, the menu strategists over on the Chick-fil-A side. You know, I knew Paul as a businessman, and I knew that he was going to think about this like we used to think about SBU, strategic business unit, long-term plans. So I felt like we had an advantage there. And I'll just take you back to no trust in light. While there were some worries and some anxieties, we finally got this call from Paul, and I remember him saying, "Hey, we're not going to come for the next visit. We're still vetting. This time, it's the next level up. The bosses are coming. We want you to be natural. We want you to be just like you would be with us, but we want you to host them, be hospitable. Let's cup some coffee. Hey, why don't you show them and let them try the blend that we've been working on together, and we're completely comfortable with you guys, and let us know how it goes."
Wait, hold on. Yeah, so let me unpack that real quick, because you got a phone call and said, "We're not coming for the next visit." But the higher ups are coming instead of us?
The executive team was going to come, including the vice presidents of supply chain, the vice president of product.
Okay.
And they said, there's no red carpet. Don't do anything extraordinary.
Right.
Just be yourselves.
Okay.
Then treat them like you've treated us. Everything's going to fall into place. Little did we know, Mike, that was just verification.
Okay.
That was allowing the bosses. This was such a big decision and so critical to where they wanted to take their breakfast program,
right,
that the big bosses were going to show up on the scene, and they were just going to confirm everything they had heard from Paul.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast a few years ago, and it was one of John Gordon's podcasts, and he was asking a question of the guest, and the guest was the president of a racing team. And the racing team, they wanted to keep things simple, and all their questions would come down to one thing. It was like, will it make us faster? Like, they would even vet through, like, are we going to hire interns? Are we going to do this? And it was, will it make us faster? I was like, wait, how does hiring an intern to distribute T-shirts make us faster, right? It was, and he could walk through the logic on it. He said, look, some of it does require some, a pretty big leap. But at the end of the day, what happened in hiring that intern to work on distributing T-shirts, increases our brand profile, and it allows somebody else to go focus on something else, that allows someone else to focus on somebody else, that allows the right people to focus on giving us a faster car, faster pit changes, those sorts of things, and putting money where we need to put it and giving us more resources. And so as you're talking about that, and you're saying they're coming, it's validation, right, that they're looking for. What I'm imagining in my mind is, it's going back to when Dan Cathy was saying coffee is the most broken thing on our menu. That's that one question, right? It's like, okay, we're going to send our best and brightest teams to go make sure we've got the right supplier and the right partner for us, because this will make or break us. They're understanding the importance of coffee to the breakfast menu. All right.
Yeah, that's a great observation, Mike. And, Chick-fil-A rarely gets a divorce. So guess what? All these years later, that supply relationship is still intact. And so the higher ups were coming because they weren't, this wasn't dating, this was getting married.
Yeah.
And with Chick-fil-A, it's marriage for life. And I really appreciate the way they treat suppliers. They realize you have a business to run, you have employees that you need to care for, and that to the degree that your company as their supplier is prosperous, it enables you to serve them better. And Chick-fil-A is my pleasure. How may I serve you? And I think that really, one of the other intangibles that came out was that we wanted to serve Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
And I'd actually like to kind of bring that out in real unambiguous ways for your listeners. And that is that if a salesperson has a servant's heart, that's half the battle. It's mindset. How may I serve you today? We hear that a lot in the hospitality industry, and we just need to borrow from that, and we need to employ that in whatever industry and markets that we're in today. That will keep the human front and center. You've heard before, well, I want to do it frictionless. It's amazing. What does frictionless mean? It means no human. Okay, it's actually the opposite. Humans enhance each other's joy. They touch each other's heart. And so we want to do an enhanced level of serving each other. And that's going to blow away the idea that this whole thing can get automated.
Are you familiar with Jesse Cole and the Savannah Bananas?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Big fan.
Yeah. Ironically, where we're filming, they have a strong connection with him, the founders of this place. But his whole deal is remove all the friction points. But to your point, it's not removing the friction points to remove human connection. It's to establish the passion that they have for the fans. It's all about fans first. It's like, what can we do to create the ultimate fan experience? And that's how they came up with, it's one price covers everything, right? And I don't know if they're doing that on the road tour, but I know at their home stadium in Savannah, it's you pay one price to come in, you can eat all the burgers you want. And somebody was pushing back on him at one point, saying, "Well, couldn't somebody come in and eat 6 or 7 or 10 burgers?" And he goes, "Yeah, if you want to do that on July in Savannah, 90 degrees, 90-something% humidity, God bless you, right? You are not going to be feeling well." But
I love that about Jesse. So Jesse's one of these thought leaders who reimagined baseball.
Yes.
Because he figured out what are the jobs that a family wants to get done. So what progress are they trying to make inside their circumstances? Social, emotional function. One of the things I just heard you say is it's very emotional. It's very social. I want to be able to afford to bring all of my kids, and I want to be entertained in ways that touch my heart and make me smile.
Yeah.
And boy, Savannah Bananas really pays that off. And that's the reason why every stadium is sold out no matter where they show up in America.
Isn't that crazy? And they're targeting now, they're wanting to make sure that they don't overlook the smaller cities. And they're going to small venues intentionally, right? Which I love that. All right. So bringing it back to that point with this is, one thing that you touched on earlier with Chick-fil-A is that they don't get divorced often, right, with their suppliers, because what I didn't hear you use this language, but it's the language that I use, which is they're not looking for suppliers and vendors, they're looking for partners. And for me, there's a huge difference between those. And frankly speaking, it takes both people to be engaged, both parties to be engaged at that level. the difference for me, and to push back on this, and if you disagree, or and let's run with it, in the sense of a vendor is there for a transaction. And when you were talking about the definition of frictionless, it's removing the human connection. It's making that transaction as efficient as possible for the purpose of cost management and delivery and things like that. Whereas a partner is somebody that's there to solve problems and be in it for the long haul. And both parties are in both parties' best interests, because they believe that pie can grow infinitely by working together. Whereas typically what I've seen a lot is when it's a vendor approach, it's a transaction and it's a win-lose approach a lot. And not always, but most of the time. But where I've seen things get broken a lot, and this is where I'd love to get your take on it, is when one party wants a partnership and the other party wants a vendor relationship. So how is it when you're coming into one of these reviews or one of these sessions, one of these high stakes events, how do you know whether they're looking for a vendor or a partner?
Well, Mike, I really like the question, because I think this is an important dichotomy: the vendor versus the partner, long-term versus short-term. Cheap isn't always cheap. We kind of covered that a little while ago, especially over the long term. And it really gets down to our shared values. Do we have shared values in this? And we'll go back to talking a little bit about what is the customer trying to accomplish, what outcomes are they looking for? And do I have the interest and willingness to get on their side? So we call that demand side thinking, not supply side thinking. So supply side thinking is transactional thinking. I'm going to impose what I have to sell today, whatever is on offer, I'm promoting. Mm-hmm. I'm going to impose that on as many unsuspecting customers as I possibly can, and I'm going to count the numbers. You almost have to suspend. Sure, there are always numbers in business, and we all have revenue goals, and we have profit goals, and we have volume goals, right? We always have to suspend that side of our thinking and really get on the customer side and understand what they're trying to accomplish. And the way I do that, Mike, is we got to break that down by the different kind of buyers in these large multifaceted organizations. There's a technical buyer. There's a user buyer that actually uses the product in that customer's process. So in the Chick-fil-A example, those are the people behind the counter, the associates who have to make the iced coffee. I can't forget them. On their side, they have an executive chef and a series of culinarians, and they're responsible for making sure that the product is designed properly. Purchasing has a role, so you might consider them the finance buyer, and they have to make sure that the cost of the product fit into their strategy about how the folks on the marketing side want to price the product.
Yeah.
And don't forget the executive buyer, who has often a veto vote on who gets to come into the family. So there's a lot of different folks, and what we try to do, Mike, thinking about how do we get a win for each one of those folks on the demand side team as they try to make progress, and what do I have to do to get on their side? And that's why we provided the insights. They didn't see it yet. And we were able to provide a vision around Gen Y, Gen Z, and iced coffee preference that really, it turns out that you're going to love this. They actually sell more iced coffee than they do hot coffee in this day and age.
Oh, wow.
Because of the way their demographic trends. And what would they say about that? Were we a partner or were we a vendor? They would say that the vendor would have just come at us really hard on the hot coffee and said, ours is the best, tastes best. Look at this price. It's a really attractive price. I'm going to try to outprice all the other roasters who are in the RFP. They would say, your hot coffee was good. The price was fair. You gave us 2 more menu items, iced coffee and frosted coffee. That's being a partner. We were really thinking about growing the entire pie, not just trying to get the win that day.
Yeah, I love that. So question for you, though, and you've seen this, and I know I've seen it several times, is not all customers are interested in having a partnership. Some truly, they're motivated, they're set up, they're governed to have vendor-based relationships. And they're low price lookers, right? They're shoppers, something to that effect. Two questions for you on that. One, how do you identify if that's their mindset? And then two, does that change your approach?
100%, especially in my new practice, Mike. As you know, I'm working on it in my new firm, which is really a startup, which is exciting for me because I'm going through all the emotions that startup people, entrepreneurial people have. And big caution here, because there's a tendency when you're trying to build your revenue base from the ground up to take anything, to not be discriminating about what the question that you just asked. But the fact is that let's just suffice it to say that I have a lot of confidence in the value that I'm bringing, my services, and I don't want to cheapen what I do because I know what a value that it brings to change a small business. So if you can imagine that moving from 2 million to 4 million is 100% growth for a small custom home builder. That's actually a client prospect that I have right now. If I could be a part of that, the impact would be very meaningful. So whatever my fees are to get there, then that should be worth it because of, if you think about the ROI. But if the owner of that custom home builder is not ready to purchase my services, that's okay at this time, because they just they've decided that, the frustrations and the pains of stagnation are not enough for them to go invest in John. So we'll spend a little bit more time on trust. I'll provide what I would consider my prescription for success based on diagnostics that have unearthed problems that we can surface.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you something, until that customer determines that it's a problem with consequences worth solving, and they are not quite ready to give up the struggle and move on to a peak that maybe they've never even imagined that they could ever get there,
yeah,
then it's not worth my time. And I would say that's true at every level of business, and there is bad business and there are bad customers.
Yeah.
So we've got to be pretty discriminating about that, Mike, because our time is better spent with customers that appreciate what we do and who we are.
Yeah, I love that you said that. So question for you, let's say you've determined that you've got a bad customer, right? Do you ride it out or do you cut it short? And what's the best way to extricate yourself from that situation? If it's a bad customer or a bad relationship, right? It's not going well. Do you just go in and put it on the table, put the elephant, point out the elephants in the room and that there's a problem? Or do you ignore it and just ride out the contract and not try to renew?
I've had this happen both ways. So I've also had suppliers come in and fire me as a customer.
Okay, that had to suck.
Fire us. And it was also an unexpected moment.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, we had an advertising agency come in and fire us. And I loved the way the principal did it. And she said, we both have to live in this community. It's evident to us that we're no longer the right supplier for you. So what you're trying to accomplish and what we are trying to accomplish are two roads that have divided. So we are no longer on the same journey. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to finish up the current projects that we're on, and we will give you enough time to find a different supplier, a different provider of these of advertising services. But we see the terminal point in 90 days. How does that sound to you? And while we were shocked, it was a wake-up call for us. We did move on, and we were able to keep going with our journey. We actually thought that we could find these services maybe, and we needed some different ideas. We needed a little bit more value for what we were getting. So it made a lot of sense for us. I really appreciate the way that she did it.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, that's great. How is that how you would advise a client as you're going forward in that same situation? I mean, let's just imagine for a second you're engaged on a project and you're looking at somebody's portfolio and you can look at it and you can quickly tell they've got some clients that are not healthy for them to have, right? Or customers that are it's not in their best interest to have. Walk me through that scenario. How do you, if I'm the owner or the leader of that business, how do you counsel me on that? And what do we do?
I definitely believe in extended time frames. I want everything to be amicable, and I don't want to leave that customer short on a product.
Right.
Especially if the product is endemic to the product they're making. Let's say it's a component and they have to have that product. Or let's say it's a distributor or a retail partner. So time is going to be really important to be able to cushion this so there's this amicable divorce that we're going to get. And then I think even to the point of helping them find a different supplier, making some recommendations that might fit. A lot of times the customer, with your goodwill, they're going to actually buy ahead of that, of whatever the end point is, so that they have plenty of inventory on hand so that they can weather this transition a little bit better. But the number one thing, Mike, is we've got to preserve our reputation, take the high road, continue to use our values, which are what are in the best interest of the customer, but what are in our interest. We are in business to make a profit, and something has gone awry. So I don't agree with continuing it because clearly we needed to make a change. Let's face into it with honesty, but let's move the communication up, including maybe even the next level or the next level manager to do a top to top to really explain what happened and why we're going to have to separate.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. I like that a lot. All right. So you've had an incredible amount of success in your career. Wherever you've gone, you've gotten promoted multiple times, and you're starting your new firm now. Let's look back real quick on your career. And you talked about Chick-fil-A and the amazing experience that was. Everybody's got an experience in their career where they went, oh, this didn't work out the way I wanted it to. Even though that experience didn't work out, the career itself has worked out amazing, right? There were learnings and everything else from that. As you think back on that, what's an example of either, an account that went sideways or some project or something that went sideways for you, and what happened and how did you overcome it? What were your lessons learned from it?
Thanks, Mike. That's a really good one. And we need to fail faster and fail often, and this is a big part of it because I really feel like in business, particularly on the commercial side of the business, if our sales and marketing people aren't taking risks and taking big swings, then what can we expect? Probably the same thing that we've always gotten. So I'll give you a recent one. We opened up 2 new ground-up markets for my company. I was working in the tape industry, so we're going to open up marine. They use a lot of tape in the original marine of the boat manufacturing segment, and then they use tape to repaint the bottom of the boats. So we were going to start up marine, and then we were going to start up a market that you and I are very familiar with. We used to work in the automotive aftermarket. Lots of tape is used in the painting of vehicles, as you know. And a paint job happens almost every time there's a collision. So both of those markets were ground up. We used manufacturers reps. We had regional managers, and then they in turn went and hired manufacturers reps. At one point we had 10 rep agencies with 75 rep agents on the street throughout the United States. And we had products that we had to that were existing, and then we had product voids that we had to fill in. We began to work on the voids. We also had to reprice. As you know, Mike, you've got to price to the market segment, and it's got to fit into the pricing scheme that fits for the buyers in those markets. We also ramped up a trade marketing program, including attending the major trade shows. It included advertising the trade publications and all those different things. It turned out that both of those markets were very competitive with ensconced brands who had multiple products to kind of round out the basket, and they were bundling a lot. We were a solo component player, tape. That was the only thing that we had. And we began to have some product-related issues as we got deeper into the application. You might or may not know that they bake cars to dry the paint faster. Well, your tape can't curl up, tear, flag, or leave a residue under those circumstances. And we began to see that while we had a very good product, there were some product enhancements that we would need to invest in. And sadly, with the challenges mounting and not generating traction as fast as we had hoped, we decided to not exit the businesses, but move from a fully fashioned sales force and true business unit to tuck the work that we had done and tuck it right back into inside sales. I grieved over that, Mike, because I knew that if we invested enough and gave ourselves enough time, I felt like that we could become one of the major players in the marine market and the automotive aftermarket, but it wasn't to be, unfortunately. I'm glad that the company continues to provide products into those markets, but it wasn't the success that I had hoped.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And then you were telling me a story about, I think in the food and beverage space, there was a customer you had that is a well-known brand, one of the top QSRs that's out there. And there was a fun story around that. I think they typically lead on price or they buy on price or something to that effect.
This is a tough one, Mike. My boss at the time, who was our chief sales officer, as he was coming up through the ranks, he went to every region of the United States because at that time, instead of centralized purchasing, this chain was decentralized. And you could go to the regional roundups of all these restaurant chain owners, the franchisees, and he began to knock off blocks for this particular brand of franchisees, 50 here, 75 there, 125 there, 35 here, until finally at corporate, they just said, we're going to centralize. This thing's got out of control and we're inconsistent, right? So you centralize in order to maintain consistency of your product, your taste, your quality, and all those things. And we won. We got the coffee and tea business at one of the largest burger chains in America. And sadly, a few years later, I get into the role and this chain reports to me through a seller who reported to me, and they called an RFP. And you're always a little bit concerned on the RFPs that it could devolve into a price war. And certainly a low-cost provider came onto the scene that had very little overhead. They had decent products, but apparently they were good enough for that chain. And while I thought we had an incredibly strategic, insight-filled presentation, this large chain, which represented millions to us, elected to go with the low-price roaster in this instance. And my boss said, we don't have anyone that we can call. We're missing an executive sponsor. And I really suffered during this time because, for one, I knew how much work he had done at the grassroots to build this up from the ground up. And this was, for him, it was a point of pride. And what he was really talking about, Mike, was in enterprise sales, we have to have a top-to-top relationship. We've got to check in and cultivate that executive person who understands the value that we're bringing. So if something goes wrong, we get a get out of jail free card, or we can use the bat phone. and we can make a quick call to that executive who can remind the middle manager team who's running the RFP, this is why John's company matters to us. This is what they do for us. This is strategic. This is long-term. This is the value that's not about the price. As a matter of fact, I'm going to alleviate the criteria on the lowest price wins, and I want to weight some other factors. And that may have, in fact, swayed it in our favor, but we didn't have that. So I never forgot that lesson, Mike. And not very long after, we were working on the largest truck stop chain in America. It was going to be, I still remember, it was something like 4 million pounds of coffee. As you can imagine, truck stops, you've got to have the coffee ready, because how are the truckers going to stay on the road when they're going coast to coast, if not for drinking coffee and staying alert? It's a safety factor. And, you know, I developed a senior level executive relationship at that truck stop chain. I'll never forget. It came down to the finals. And I thought, do we hold with what we've got, or with that defeat in my recent past? I thought, do I drop my price all the way to the point where it's going to endanger our margins? And this may actually turn out to not be good business, but bad business for us, unprofitable business. Right. So I made a phone call to the senior executive that I cultivated top to top, just like my boss had said, John, you got to have top to top, because if you're in a lurch, you need to be able to make a phone call. And the executive said, this phone call never happened. We appreciate all the things that you're doing, including the strategy, the assortment, the variety of drinks, and your representation. We believe you guys have the integrity and you understand our best interests. You're here for our outcomes, not just for yourself. We also want to make sure that you can make some money out of this deal. Does that answer your question? And we won the business.
That's awesome.
And that was redemption for me. And I feel so grateful and very blessed that I was able to lead my team through that process of learning from a setback and then quickly gaining redemption the next time around for another big opportunity.
Yeah, I love that. And now, all right, walk me through your firm now, because I think about the lessons that you've learned, right? And just how much you're going to be able to accelerate your clients' growth because of those lessons learned, so where they don't have to go through that necessarily, or if they do, it's their choice, right? They get the benefit of when somebody hires you, they get your years of experience, they get your understanding and your knowledge, and that also came on the shoulders of giants that went before you as well. So yeah, tell me a little bit more about your firm and like what your ideal client looks like.
Mike, I appreciate you bringing that up, because there's a phenomenon going on now in small to mid-sized businesses. And that is simply this. They would love to have the wisdom gained through, in my case, 3 decades of experience. However, for a senior guy like myself, you might not be able to afford us full time. So, this has been going on in the financial world with fractional CFOs, fractional human resources executives. Mm-hmm. Now we have fractional chief revenue officers. Or fractional VPs of sales. And the neat thing I can do, Mike, is I can provide in 1 day a week we'll say the sales infrastructure, which includes a whole variety of super important processes that represent the best in class of everything.
Yeah.
We can put in a powerful CRM system. We can work on the performance management of your salespeople, the sales coaching, make sure they have really good targets. I'll redo the compensation plan, all these various and sundry things that we can do to really create a growth engine for a small to mid-sized business that maybe is stagnated. I'll give you a reason why, Mike. Often they are founder-led. So the founder developed the first few customers. Why? Because the founder, she developed the product, so she knew the product better than anybody else. She had the most passion. So she went out and got all the customers, and now the customers are highly concentrated, dependent on her, and she's never really transferred the responsibility of sales to a capable sales team, and now we are declining. We're not growing year over year over year. So we come on the scene a lot of times, Mike, when that owner, president, founder realizes we're not going to make the next milestone. We've hit a ceiling. And if our milestone is to create value for our company, for our employees, for our shareholders, or maybe the owner just wants to retire one day, we need to do some remedial work now. Let's go back. Let's spend 18 months to 2 years and really put this growth engine in place. Let's make it something that we can be proud of. And we have been able to demonstrate, Mike, double-digit year-over-year growth with very predictable results. And the reason why I know this is because we've put in the right processes. An example would be a term you and I talk about all the time. We've got a burgeoning pipeline. We've got a backlog from last year that now is going to help us get started again in 26 with a really great campaign to begin the year with, because we had this great pipeline that we've built, because our salespeople are being managed and they're being held accountable. So that's really what I do now, is intervene in that process for small to mid-sized businesses. And I can't tell you the impact that it's having is so meaningful for me because it changes lives.
Love that. Okay. That's fantastic. Is there anything else that you were wanting to talk about today that we haven't touched on yet?
Well, I want to simplify sales, and I want to get it on the demand side, and this is something I became kind of obsessed with. We've already talked about it a little bit this afternoon, but I want to give you some examples just because I think it breaks it down. And I want to go back to what is the job that the customer wants to get done. So what is their struggle? Let me give you our struggle in the Buckner household. As you know, Mike, I'm married, 32 years, 3 kids. And somewhere along the way, we noticed that every Christmas, half of our kids are sneezing. We realized that it was the Christmas tree. The Christmas tree was the culprit. Now, you probably, each year when you go out with your family, maybe there's even a place not far from where you live where you can actually cut your own, or you buy your Christmas tree from a Christmas tree lot. And of course, it brings these incredible Douglas firs or Fraser firs into your home, and it's got the aroma. Here's the problem. It also has allergens for people who are allergic to trees. Mike, we have had a Balsam Hill for the last 10 years. What is a Balsam Hill? It's the #1 brand in artificial Christmas trees. They realized that the job was not just aesthetics, the beautification of your home, the celebration of the season, decorating the tree, putting lights on the tree, all the things that you have to do. But there were actually multiple other jobs. And here's one of the jobs that was, we'll call it sensory in nature. We got to not have our kids miserable because they're sneezing for the entire holiday season. So my wife found out that Balsam Hills, our Christmas trees, will not stimulate the allergic reaction. They're non-allergenic. And Dad, I'm the guy that always had to string the lights. They come pre-lit.
Okay.
In sections. So I wanted to share that with you because I think it gives a good example of a brilliant brand who wanted to sell more artificial Christmas trees. And they realized that the job wasn't about just aesthetics, but there was a secondary job which had to do with eliminating allergic reactions in the home and making it easy on Dad who didn't want to light the Christmas tree each year.
Yep.
So that's the Balsam Hill story, and I think it illustrates the point that I wanted to make about jobs to be done.
I love that. Love that. That's fantastic. And then one other quick question for you. Small and medium-sized business, everybody's got a different definition of that. What do you guys think about when you think of small to medium-sized business?
Mike, 3 to 100 million. Don't mind working with startups either, so they could be really, really new. But usually there are some sales that are beginning to build here. And we're starting to get maybe as many as 10 to 15 employees. Maybe we've started to master the production of a product line. We're starting to build out our functions. There are different people who have different roles now because, of course, we've got to kind of have a division of labor. And about that time, particularly if sales were founder-led, there's that first ceiling that we're talking about. And that's a good example of a milestone or a plateau that can occur in those small to mid-sized businesses. And really, I work across industries. I love the verticals that I've been in, but I love to work across a whole variety of different industries because I think anymore, Mike, as you know, it's the process, not the product. Usually the team knows the product pretty well. That's usually not the deficiency. It's really having a robust process that everyone follows that makes the difference. And so that's what I would say about the small and mid-sized businesses.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned earlier about the national championship that just took place in football, and you think about Coach Signetti and what he did. He brought a process to Indiana, and he brought a belief and a process, and that it wasn't just the process; it was the belief and the culture and a whole variety of other things. But that relentless demand for excellence, right, and that the game's always on, and that we're always going to perform a certain way, in whatever it is that we do, and that is what enabled them to turn around the least winning or the most losing program to being a national champion, and the first team to go 16-0 in over 130 years.
Yeah, what a story! It's just really a tribute to him and the Indiana Hoosiers. And
well, I'm looking forward to you being that in the selling world.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I'm excited about this chapter that I'm in now. Yeah. It's great to see you again.
You too.
We've waited 20 years for this reunion, and it happened on your podcast.
You got to love that. Got to love that. Well, John, it's been fantastic. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to working with you, and thanks for being a guest.
I'm grateful to be here, Mike.
Absolutely.